Welcome, everybody. Another episode here at Chain Reaction. Excited to welcome our friend at Konexial here, Jeremy Baksht. He's the co-founder and chief executive officer of Catena Clearing, and we'll get into some of that here in a little bit. Some of the things that you should know about Jeremy is that he started Catena as a logistics data infrastructure company, kind of focused on solving one of the freight industry's most persistent challenges, and that is that fragmented data, inconsistent data, and inaccessible transportation data really had no place to live. And they bring it all together. Catena Clearing provides a normalized and permissioned data layer that enables shippers, carriers, brokers, insurers, and technology platforms to securely access real-time freight and telematics data across systems. And just to be fully transparent, we're entering into a relationship with them and they do a really great job. And we'll get into a little bit more about how to contact Jeremy. So welcome, Jeremy. I appreciate you taking some time here to talk with us and to get your perspective on some things.
Thanks so much, Jerry. Yeah, no, it's brilliant. We're starting off the year 2026, feeling a lot of energy and excitement around this industry. And, I incorporated the business with my two partners January 4th, 2024. So this will be our third year in operations and feels great to be here. And yeah, I'm excited to talk through this with your listeners. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. So let's get into a couple of questions here about, industry perspective. And this is really about you. I know you said you had a few partners, but what early experiences across like finance, data, supply chain shaped your understanding of critical infrastructure and how critical infrastructure enables market efficiency? And that really has to do with data, right? Which is what you guys do. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I love the tee up, Jerry. I've been in and around data and industrial technology for the last 3 decades. My dad's an entrepreneur. I studied mechanical engineering. I worked at Anderson Consulting for a couple years doing data across large ERPs and systems. Then through my journeys, was an investment banker for about a decade, covering industrial tech. And then through that lens, was able to start a couple companies. The other two were in fintech. I was the head of data strategy for Walmart most recently, and before that, I was the head of alternative data for Bloomberg. So tying together finance, data, and the supply chain, it's given me a lot of perspective that sometimes deep industry leaders don't always have. I think sometimes coming from out of industry, learning in industry can teach you a lot. At Bloomberg, as an example, I saw lots of standardized, high quality data underpinning trillions of dollars of capital markets flow. And when data is
Wow.
clean and trusted, markets actually work and they're efficient. And it was cool seeing microsecond trading and getting to know quants there. And at Walmart, a lot of those same principles really applied, seeing complex supply chains. And I started to realize, data isn't just about reporting, it's really about coordination, risk management, and massive scale in real time. So I think what stood out to me the most was you've got this gigantic industry that has really got a lot of point solutions that don't really work together. And every time, I see a startup building another dashboard or building another piece for one constituent, it really guides me into thinking you could just bring this all together in one universal architecture. And we started looking at supply chain first and inventory management first. And there's a lot of really great companies there. But what I didn't see was a lot of data connectivity and freight. And at the end of the day, what informs inventory management? Well, first you got to figure out where the inventory is. So going back to
And
this,
how much you have, right?
what is it? Where is it? Is it on a pallet? What country is it in?
Yeah.
Is it stuck somewhere? Are you racking up fees? Who is the perspective? Is it the supplier? Is it the manufacturer? Is it the shipper? There's a lot of different names and nomenclature to get your head around. But just in and of itself, the freight data fragmentation problem, that's the one I realized was the one I wanted to solve. And as I mentioned, I have a couple partners, but one of them has built two gigantic companies in other spaces, Travis May. So when Travis at Shaper Capital said, let's incubate this together, I spent about 5 months doing research, talking to every one of those constituents, and just trying to figure out where do we start. But I keep coming back to freight data fragmentation is the problem we want to solve. So we've been building for the last 2 years and excited to explore that a little bit more.
That's awesome. One of the biggest problems I always saw was when people are like, oh, yeah, if we just get a reporting system, it'll solve all our problems. And that's just not the case. Like, I mean, you need to have a structure and a process for the data. You need to have, reliable sources for the data because, you mentioned risk mitigation around data. No one ever says that, but there is a lot of risk around bad data. And, I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a room where two people come in with a report that's supposed to be about the same information, but those numbers are wildly in different directions. And
Yeah.
now all of a sudden you go, oh my God, how do we fix this? Right. And that's kind of where you guys come in and kind of standardize their data flow so that they actually have reliable information to be able to make decisions on. Am I reading that correctly?
I think that's right, Jerry. We always come back to where's the source of truth. And the biggest challenge in transportation is interoperability generally tends to live in silos. So if you look at electronic logging devices, they're optimized for compliance, hours of service, and the specific reasoning that the hardware and software was created. If you look at TMS platforms, they're optimized for workflows. Brokers have optimization because they care about transactions, getting something from point A to point B, not necessarily all of this coming together. Insurance, what do they look at? They're optimized for underwriting and monitoring specific assets, having nothing to do with loads and pickups. So each system makes sense in isolation, but there isn't a neutral, interoperable data layer that's ever emerged to tie all this together. And the cost of fragmentation is real. Operationally, if you have exceptions coming from weather disruptions, detention, theft, and delays, or if you have financial issues between disputes and insurance premiums and fraud exposure, you've got all of these operational leadership team problems that bubble up to the surface. So if each of the systems that are guiding this data flow to turn into operational insights, if they're all different, as you said, you're going to spend a lot of time reconciling and you don't even know what the answer is. So I think leaders overestimate their ability to understand normal operations and just think, oh, it's visibility or it's just transaction flows. There's so much abstraction between the carrier, the assets the carrier owns, and then the drivers as well. So when we think about a freight identity graph, it's really what we're trying to build, which is who's operating this? Who is the owned carrier? Who has the fleets? Who has the assets? Who's the driver? And then getting into the inventory of like, okay, well, what's in the truck too? We haven't really gotten deep into trailers. That's a big thing that we're going to be doing this year for a couple of TMSs and some of our partners. So I think we've gotten pretty crisp on following a truck. We have over 500,000 trucks in the US alone. Next up for us will be trailers and getting deeper into the chain of custody of the inventory and the asset itself.
When you talk about the data fragmentation problem, I always talk about how there's not a line item on the profit and loss, or there's not a line item on the balance sheet that says data fragmentation issue, $500,000. What operational and financial costs does fragmented data really create for shippers, carriers, and brokers? Like how I know that there's a problem. Everybody knows there's a problem, but it's so hard to sometimes quantify the problem. How do you guys guide your prospects, your customers, to understand what the real impact is of data fragmentation?
I love that question, Jerry. It's the one that we have to answer every time we meet with a customer. All they're thinking is if they're the top leadership, what am I improving on? What's the ROI and what is your business cost? And how do I reconcile that? So I think for us, it's really audience bound. So when we're looking at a shipper, it tends to be about cargo theft and fraud and disputes and detention and demurrage and the cost of doing business. So the friction for a shipper or a supplier tends to be in those areas around loss. If we can stop them from losing 10% of the time, is that worth and justifying the cost of us? And by the way, I don't mean to suggest we're insanely expensive. We're the fraction of the cost of a TMS as an example. So I think that's the ROI that we think about. So information asymmetry is a real problem, but we always need to link it back to whoever we're talking to and what is their specific thing. So a couple of the partners I can discuss, for example, are A to B. A to B is a company that helps orchestrate credit cards for the fuel industry. So what do we do specifically for A to B? It's two things. If one of their, let's say Uber Freight is one of the credit cards that they are the back end and they power for, we look at two different things. Is a truck currently right next to a pump geofenced by location? If yes, okay, that's probably good. Sometimes somebody takes a credit card or a QR code from another trucker or a friend, and they're trying to essentially, take gas when they're not supposed to take gas. So step one for us is a very simple location data pool, geofence between is the truck currently right next to a pump? And that's a really good step one check. And then the step two check is how much are they actually trying to put in? So if the gauge meter of a truck is reading, let's say, medium or half full, why are they trying to put in 300 gallons? Clearly, there's a disconnect here. Maybe they're giving half to a friend or putting it in their own truck, etc. So a very simple pull of where is the location of the truck and is the fuel gauge reading what they're trying to put into the truck. So in that particular case, we've saved, it's an illustrative number, but it's in the dozens, over 10%. So is the cost of doing business with us worth it? I think absolutely in that case. So the hard ROI tends to wrap around what are the numbers and what are the specific use cases. Because you're right, there is no line item for I don't like my data or data quality. And the other way to look at it is cost. If you're employing 10 people to reconcile data and I can save you from those 10 people, maybe make it two, that
Or
is a hard
repurpose them,
ROI,
right?
very easy
Repurpose
to
them.
look at. Repurposing.
Repurpose the people, because I always talk about how there's um, not non-value added work, right? And let's take the non-value added work, automate it, and then have these people create value for you, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for to drive your business is value oriented options. So when you look at the infrastructure for freight data, and we're in the telematics business, so I love this question. I want to see what your
Yeah.
response is. But what role does telematics data play when it's properly structured and contextualized when it comes to infrastructure for freight data?
I love that question and happy to talk about it because you guys are a great partner to us. It's very easy to just assume that telematics data is very simple things like a location ping or hours of service because that's why many of the ELDs have been put into business. But what we love about, more elegant architectures like yours is there's a lot to be learned from if you look at the history of where a truck has been. You can see maintenance records, you can see routing, you can see fuel management, and of course the safety. Is there a harsh braking issue? Is there a speed limit issue? What is actually happening behind the asset and behind the driver of the asset? So disaggregating the actual carrier and the asset and the driver and understanding, is this carrier better than other carriers? Is this particular asset aged? If you can look behind the numbers, if I have a truck that's been on the road for 2 million miles, it's probably going to be out of service at some point or have an engine blow up. So just knowing those types of things is a lot more than just where is the truck right now. So I think that TSP, ELD, whatever acronym you want to use, that's really where the value add is. There's so much rich data to harvest on what is the asset and how is it utilized that I think goes under, most people don't really think about it, in part because 97% of this industry is carriers with 5 trucks or less. So they're often not able to see much of what's in the actual ELD data itself. They're just focused on compliance, focused on IFTA for fueling, and the couple things they need to do to run their business, but they're not operationalizing and thinking about how to be a step ahead. And this is a topic that comes up a lot on LinkedIn that I'd like to frame as an economic statement. We are at the tail end of a late cycle right now, and what you see is really large carriers able to deploy and take really bad margins. You also see really small owner operators that are able to carry a specific thing. Maybe they're really good at cold chain or something that keeps them in the business. But this messy middle where margins are completely eroded, these are the carriers in the middle that really need to use this data. So what I want to do as the leader of Catena is really try to expose what is the art of the possible. Whether it's Samsara, Motive, Geotab, Konexial, you all are here to advantage the information industry and the layer of freight identity. There's a lot in that ELD that can be put to work if you know where to put it to work. And whether that's AI agents or just a better system of record, there's so much rich data that is collected on a truck that I think the industry hasn't really adopted yet. And most people don't understand that there's just so much rich harvest that can happen, whether that's in Snowflake or analytics reports or the actual platform itself. Just we got to just get the data where it's supposed to go so that somebody can actually write scripts and algorithms to make it more useful.
Yeah, great assessment. Here's one because I always ask our sales team, value versus transactional, right? And when you look at leaders, C-suite, whoever you're dealing with from an executive level, executive sponsor, what have you, and they think about data architecture, how do you get them to look at this as a long-term strategic asset rather than just a technical project where, yep, checked in the boxes and we did this and we did that and we did this? Because what you provide, you know, is truly a value-oriented strategic environment. And sometimes people struggle to look at this as, okay, that project's done, let me move on. But this is really something that lives with them forever.
You've just asked the seminal and most important question for this industry, and it's really about adoption and change management. And the most common resistance we see is operationalizing freight data systems. It's not just a technical thing, it's really an organizational thing. It's psychological. And when an executive feels like they're on a short string and they only have 6 months to prove themselves and to stay in the seat, as you exactly said, they just focus on what's ahead of them. How do you get people to think 3 to 5 years out? And this is where teams that are manually reconciling reports, debating whose data is correct, the tax of fragmentation, these brittle one-off integrations, when we help them sort of look at it from a consulting perspective, we can get in and help them understand that if you don't modernize, this is what you're basically incurring in costs of fraud. I think fraud has really like been one of the biggest hot topics. Operational efficiency, fraud, not running into deadhead. Those are the types of things that if you bubble them up to the surface and say, how did you perform in 2025 versus 2024? What was different? What if you could actually improve by 10% in these three areas? What does your 2026 look like? Let's get more thematic and look more annually. We do our best to try to lean into that, but at the end of the day, adoption and change management start at multiple levels. So for us, it's getting with the CEO, the CTO, the COO, and getting multiple champions. And I think that's where the universal telematics approach is a multi-layered problem. And you have to thread it through leadership, through middle management, and the day-to-day user. So we see the most success when we have multiple touch points and also somebody that's already committed to doing it. Obviously, those projects go a lot faster. But I think it's up to us to sort of integrate at the top, middle, and bottom layers. Because if you have all three signed off saying this is valuable, we're here for the long run, you're going to see a lot better executive outcomes, and then all the way down to the daily outcomes. And Jerry, as you sort of noted before, it's about repurposing and understanding that it's not about letting people go. It's about freeing people up for higher value
Yeah.
activities. So we always frame it as your cost and operational efficiencies aren't losing people. It's just putting them into higher value added roles and more customer facing roles. We love the AI for freight brokerage companies. We're very friendly with several of our customers. At the end of the day, like, can you replace a physical check call with a robot? Hopefully, a lot of these systematic things shouldn't be people tasks every 5 minutes. So I know from seeing freight brokerage workflows, nobody wants to be looking in email, on their phone, on WhatsApp, taking phone calls. That's a cognitive damage that leaves you so tired after an 8-hour shift. So I think it's you asked about adoption and change management, but I think it comes back to top, middle, and bottom, and understanding everybody's perspectives that is involved in these inefficient processes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people, people that have been with a company for a period of time, it's hard to replace that learned data that they have. And all we want to do is shift them from just spreadsheets and analytics to value impact, mostly around customers, right? Or process or what have you. So we talk about the same thing, totally agree. When you look at data, um, in what ways do you feel, and this is something that could be really helpful for tons and tons of carriers, really all carriers, that improved data flow can influence pricing discipline and carrier relations, between shippers and carriers, brokers and carriers, but pricing discipline really, because obviously the freight market has problems, pricing is suppressed and not where it used to be. So how can data flow help with that?
I think you're right. I mean, in all these relationships, it comes back to operating efficiency, being on time, being in full, less theft, less fraud. So communicating how to get better route optimization, fuel management, running a business more systematically, and building trust too. I think at the end of the day, this industry has been governed on trust, and a lot of that is a handshake. Actually totemizing that, I think you actually said it really succinctly, which is if you can architect what your company's protocol is, then it can cascade all the way down. A business isn't a business if three people are out on holiday and you can't operate, you clearly haven't defined your discipline and your roles. And whether that's for AI and agency and robotics to sort of automate things, or just having total customer service cascade all the way down. So what I think you're basically hitting on is if everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and it's actually written down somewhere and it's a real operating procedure, you have some hope of consistent quality, but you also have some hope of if somebody's out of the office, it's still going to work. Or if an AI agent is taking half the work, it's still going to work.
Yeah.
So that's really what it comes back down to is pricing discipline and trust and carrier relationships improve when you have an isolated operating system that actually is understood and well written down, and it's not just making stuff up as you go. And that's what we see in any industry. Until you have industry expertise, you can't layer on top or add a protocol or an AI agent because you have to know exactly what you're trying to monitor for. It's I guess probabilistic outcomes are one thing, but actually being the source of truth and doing it right is really what matters here. So I think it's avoiding cargo theft and improving on like fraud metrics and just building trust across the industry.
Awesome. So I want to go back to change management and really user adoption or job adoption in general. There are typically different indicators, different triggers. We call them critical business issues. What is the company looking to solve when they enter into a project? But what indicators suggest that a company is really ready to take the next step when it comes to data maturity?
That's a great point. Well, you said it best in the beginning of the conversation, which is if you're constantly reconciling data, you don't know your source of truth. That's
Mhm.
really where you have a lot of operating issues. So I think having a clean sheet of defects and errors being below, let's say, a certain threshold, if you're seeing data across systems having less than 1% defects and those are error handling, I think that's a good way to look at metrics. So, how often are you looking across systems and seeing inefficiencies? And also, I hate to say this, but missing data, having metrics for missing data is another thing. Like across ELDs, we do see certain ELDs, I won't pick on them, have a lot of just missing data
You
because
can pick on them. Go ahead. You can, as long as it's not Conexial, you can pick on them.
Without naming too many names of your competitors, there are
No, no,
some
go ahead.
businesses
Go
that
ahead.
are just stood up to get their $100 a month subscription fee versus actually having complete data. So having data requirements around mandatory data sets, mandatory items, and also I know you can edit certain fields. Having a certain threshold around how many fields have been edited, you're only expecting to have issues that need to be edited, I don't know, 2% of the time. So if you see a lot of scrub data, particularly around hours of service, you can guess that you've got issues. So looking at defects, looking at reconciliation, understanding missing data, and also seeing how many edits are in there. Why are there all these text messages in certain fields? And then also the consistency of data. Sometimes you really have data fields that are, just don't make sense. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you do kind of an audit every once in a while of your data, if you can see something on a page that has an issue, on the first page, you probably have a lot of issues underneath. It's sort of like pigeon management. If you see a problem and you just pack into one thing, you probably have systematic issues along the way.
Yeah.
So there's so many different layers of data quality, but data assurance and data quality, have to be there. And you can tell when you see omissions and missing data, that those are really the metrics we look at.
So let's talk about the future of freight and supply chain technology. We're both in the technology business when it comes to this space. Which current assumptions about the technology and supply chain are most likely to be challenged as we move forward over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, in your opinion?
It's data sharing. I started this business just a couple years ago, and I know the FMCSA mandates came out last decade. It's really just building trust in the network. I look at identity and digital identity around the world. I was just traveling in Europe. Some countries are very well penetrated into understanding all their users, meaning people. Others are less so. So I think the governance of this industry, having the right CDLs, having the right people in the seats, you're just going to see a sea change in identity. And I know truckers don't love being tracked, and I understand why. But at the end of the day, the next 3 to 5 years, freight data sharing and governance, I think will mature significantly. In order to maintain the fabric of society, like when I traveled abroad, they're looking at the biometrics of my 3-year-old. If somebody needs to look in the eyes of a camera in order to be followed, in order to change countries, I would think somebody driving a 10-ton truck with 50 tons of cargo, you should know who that person is. You
It's a
should probably
ninety
have their
thousand pound
fingerprint.
missile, man. It's a 90,000 pound missile.
It's crazy. I mean, as somebody that flies frequently, if I don't know who my pilot is and they're not governed every day by the FAA and how much time have they slept, how are they in the seat, air traffic control. We already saw it with airlines. You've got to see it in trucks. I think freight data sharing and governance are going to mature significantly, and those standards of permissioning and interoperability are going to keep happening. The trend is, my friend, I know I'm talking about our mutual businesses, but there is no way you're going to see a world where in 2030 you don't know who's driving a truck, this John Smith stuff. It's got to go away. So resilience and competitive supply chain data started by companies like a Blue Yonder or an O9 Solutions, or some of the newer companies like Augur, you're going to need real-time context. You're going to need adaptability. The trend is happening. Whether the truck drivers enjoy it or not. At the end of the day, how do you govern a missile without knowing who's driving it? So freight data sharing, I think, is going to see a sea change. That's really, we're putting our stamp on that in the industry, and we're hoping that's our business solution is going to help this. But I've got to think freight identity and freight data sharing is got to be job one. That's really what you're going to see is right now, for example, we work with some platforms that don't require ELD connectivity. So you're seeing opt-in rates of 30 to 50% if the value proposition is positioned well. We've got guys like Truckstop we work with. We have hundreds of thousands of trucks on Truckstop that we now monitor. They get better matching. If you're a truck driver willing to put in your ELD or a carrier willing to put in your ELD, you're going to get better load matching. You're going to build trust. So without mandatory opt-ins, we don't see 100%, but the value props keep getting better. And some of our customers are in factoring. Why not have 100% opt-in? If you want a cash advance, I better know where your truck is. Like that just makes sense. So insurance, factoring, fintech use cases, I think we'll continue to see these start to move to mandatory, and you'll start to get 100% ELD compliance and opt-in. So trend is our friend. We're going to get there.
I'm going to steal that from you. I'm just letting you know. Trend is my friend, you know?
Sure.
Um, so let's talk about down the line. Let's talk about Catena specifically. When you look ahead over the next 10 years, what impact do you think your company is going to have on the freight industry?
Jerry, the best thing that could happen to me in the next decade is nobody knows who Katina is. We're so good. We're the piping behind the wall. The industry doesn't even need to talk about us. It's assumed that data infrastructure works. It's assumed that what matters is decisions get made better, disputes go down, and trust increases. So, as a technology leader in this space, my hope is Katina isn't even a brand because it's just something that's part of your cost of doing business. So that's really my hope. The future of freight is not determined by individual platforms or features. It's determined by quality, integrity, accessibility of data. So of course, as a person that runs this company, I hope we have a big brand. I hope things go where they're supposed to go. But at the end of the day, you don't want to hear from us. Some of our best customers don't want to do QBRs. They don't even want to talk. They're just like, your solution's awesome. We love you. It works. We'll tell all our friends to use you, but we don't have any issues. So at the end of the day, that's my hope for us. Is Katina is the silent piping behind the wall for this industry.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. You built a little bit of a unicorn there, and that's spectacular. So here's the last question for you. This is a personal one, and one I always ask everybody because we want to know a little bit about you that most people wouldn't know. So if I took your best friend and I locked him or her into a room, no windows, one point of egress, and I
Yeah.
hold the magic key, and I sat there and I said, I want you to tell me something about Jeremy that he does not want the rest of the world to know. And if you do, I'll let you out. What would that person tell me?
My hope would be, and this isn't intended to be self-serving, is they would probably tell you I'm insanely relentless. I'm somebody that just doesn't sleep, that wants to win so badly it hurts sometimes. This is my third startup. My other two were good exits, not incredible exits. I want this to be a gigantic company. So sometimes ambition can be looked at as an ugly thing, particularly in other countries. In the US, hey, my grandfather came over here in a boat in 1917 from Belarus. We're immigrants, we're capital risky people. I want to fight to win every day. And sometimes that naked ambition is a little bit scary. So I do my best to be humble about it and hide it a bit. They'd probably tell you, you better get out of his way because Jeremy's relentless and he doesn't lose. Whether or not he wants everybody to know that, I think I just said it on a podcast, but that's probably my most unguarded secret is I have a huge will to win. I don't have a lot of hobbies. I do love my kids and my family, but even reading a novel sometimes feels to me like cheating. And I feel like that's getting better and better. NVIDIA's founder says that I go to a movie, I don't even watch the movie. I don't read books. I have no life. That's kind of like my mantra. I do try to read books. I have had hobbies in the past. I do like to play golf, but right now, basically since I've started Katina, I'm just relentless and I don't see anything getting in our way. And certainly my time is aimed at this. So my hope would be they would say Jeremy's relentless and he's terrifying. So you
It's
better
funny
hope you're
because
enabling his win, not getting in the way of it.
yeah, there's some commonalities there. My parents came from Italy, and we're immigrants, and my CEO always says I don't spend enough time with my family, and I wake up at 3 in the morning, jump on the CRM, and I totally get it. Like I really do, and it's healthy. It's unhealthy a little bit, but the will to win is incredible, man. It's incredible. So. How do people?
there's no such thing as work-life balance, Jerry. I think guys like you and me get that, and I am our CRO. At the end of the day, we have a head of growth, Allie Hancock. She's amazing. The two of us do all sales all the time. I love being CEO and I love running the business, but I'm our CRO. I'm staring at our CRM. I'm thinking about who to call today. I'm sequencing it. I'm trying for nuance.
Same thing,
Think
man.
about which case studies to throw at them.
Yeah. What other partnerships could I look at? How do we grow this thing?
That's right.
Like
I wake up thinking about it.
I
There's no way around it.
yeah, I mean, I recently signed up for a CRO program at University of Pennsylvania Wharton School for executive leaders. How can I get better? Like, how can I get better? How can I change our go-to-market strategy? How can I change our pricing strategy? How can I do this to help get better and to help Konexial get better? So I'm in the same boat as you. How do people get a hold of you? Like, if somebody wants to find Jeremy, talk about Catena, or just pick your brain about your thoughts about the space, give us some opportunity to find you.
You know what's funny is LinkedIn is something I've been on for over 2 decades. I was a really, really early adopter, and I have 35,000 followers there. I'm really proud of the community that we've been building there. I'm on there all the time, so I'd say follow me on LinkedIn, reach out. If you've got a question, I'm usually pretty responsive. Emails and texts and so forth. And I go to a ton of conferences too. But for somebody that I haven't met yet, it's typically LinkedIn. And if you send me a smart email or have a really good question, I like engaging that way. So I'd say LinkedIn. I was on it today already posting about the BGSA conference and some other things. So anyway, I love LinkedIn. So that's a pretty easy format.
And just to be respectful, spell your last name so people find the right Jeremy.
Oh, sure. Baksht. Only one vowel in there. Baksht.
I'm sure that was not a problem during school.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing that I'm over 200 pounds and played college lacrosse because I got picked on a lot in high school. So sometimes, getting picked on helps you overcome.
Well, I appreciate you joining us. You really bring clarity to one of the more complex challenges in transportation. That's really how data shapes trust, efficiency, resilience across the entire freight ecosystem. Katina, and like I said, we're proud to partner with you guys. Does a great job. It really it consolidates a lot of data and gives you a single source of truth coming from multiple sources of truth, right? And you kind of sift through all the noise to be able to get very specific and granular data for your clients. So I really appreciate you taking time. It sounds like you guys are doing great. We're proud to partner with you and look forward to helping both of us grow our companies together. So thanks, Jeremy, for joining us and thanks for taking time.
Oh, delighted, Jerry. Really appreciate it. And thanks for running Chain Reaction. There isn't really enough highlighting of like the boring data stuff out there. So being your partner and teaming up and shining a light on kind of one of the more boring parts of this market, we really appreciate that too.
Boring leads to a lot of ROI. So, keep doing what you're doing because boring is good. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Bye.